All right, welcome to a beautiful day. How about that out there? Well, I don't think we would have had a class if we were not online, but the school I think might be closed. But yes, go ahead, Fernando.
Good morning, Professor.
Hello. Um, so I don't know. I guess since we're online, we'll just keep doing this online. But one of my other schools is in person right now, and they had to close the school today because the weather is so horrific. But they're much closer to the city, so that I guess there's a lot of flooding down there. But the thing about Purchase, that whole immediate area, the thing you have to worry about is the trees. There's so many trees in that area, and sometimes when things get ugly, the trees come down, and before you know it, there's no power, and it's also impossible to get in up Anderson Hill Road. So this is no fun. But at least here we're safe inside our rooms, and we don't have to worry about it as long as the power stays on, and that's good. So let's see, where did we leave off? Now, let's go to Moodle and take a look at what's happening. Today is the 26th, and we are in the middle of chapter 9, our discussion about economic growth. Actually, economic growth is a very complex area of study. It's actually a very involved, it's something that, a lot of economists specialize in this area. And in fact, one of them, Eugene Solow, actually won the Nobel Prize for his contributions to this field. So it's very intense, it's very complicated. We're just looking, of course, at the important highlights of it, but you can see why this is so important, because the best thing we can do for society is to increase the growth rate of its output, because that's really the best way to increase standards of living. So anything we can do to accelerate growth is going to be very welcome. So, but of course, it's a very long-term process. This doesn't happen overnight. But, things like investing in education and in research and development and that type of thing is all helping us accelerate our growth. And of course, in this day and age, a lot of companies like Apple and Amazon and, Tesla, they're constantly coming up with these great new breakthroughs. And of course, they're making themselves crazy rich, but they're also in the process making us better off as well. And so this is what we want to see more of. We want more Elon Musks out there developing exciting new products for us to better our lives, and also to employ a lot more people. So anyway, let's see, there's something going on with, Tesla. I think yesterday, Tesla, the value of the company for the first time reached $1 trillion. Hold on one second. So it is the second fastest company ever to reach a market value of $1 trillion. What that means is that if you wanted to go out and buy up all the stocks that were issued by Tesla, it would cost you $1 trillion. Ooh, that's a lot of money. You were? Well, I hope you're making a lot of money then, because they're really zooming at it. They apparently cut a deal with Hertz. Hertz is the major rental company, and they're going to buy a fleet of Teslas that customers can rent if they want them. And nice job. I like that. Now, of course, Apple's market capitalization is about double that, but they've been around a little bit longer. So I'm sure Amazon is way over $1 trillion as well. So, and why is this happening? Why is the company worth so much? Because Tesla is giving us things that we want. And even though Tesla cars are fairly expensive right now, that won't last forever. As they make more and more of them, they'll become cheaper and cheaper. And pretty soon we'll all have a Tesla. How do you like that? So, all right, anyway, but that was apparently the second quickest time to reach $1 trillion. And so naturally the stock price is going to go through the roof when something like that happens, because it's a big deal. Okay, man, yeah, it's all over the place. Man. All right, well, anyway, let's get back to this. Let's go visit Moodle. By the way, this matters to everyone in this room, because sooner or later, when you graduate, you'll have money to invest, and you'll be looking for opportunities like this one, looking for companies that will grow like crazy in the future because they have great ideas, and they're run by a very good CEO, like somebody who has a lot of vision, like Elon Musk. And if you buy enough of these types of stocks, you'll find yourself doing very well. It'll certainly make it easier for you to retire, that's for sure. All right, so anyway, let's get back to Moodle. And let's grab all of our materials. All right, here we go. So with the fall macro. So the last time we left off, we were looking at chapter 9. Now, there's a problem set here for 9. So I think we'll be done with 9 today. And when we're done with 9, we can start working on the problem set. So as long as we're finished today, we should be able to do the chapter 9 problem set on Friday. Now, this is a big turning point because the second midterm is based exclusively on chapters 5 through 9. So that means very soon we're going to have a second sample midterm, which is down here somewhere. Oh, no, it isn't. All right, I'll make sure it gets up there very soon, but it's a little premature to talk about that, but it is coming fairly quickly. Like I said, before we get to the second midterm, we have to finish chapter 9. We have to go through the problem set, and then we'll do the sample midterm number 2, which is only based on chapters 5 through 9. And then we'll finally be ready for the second midterm, okay? In the meantime, I'm hustling to get your first ones ready. It's taking longer than I thought because, well, you know, everything takes longer than you think, but soon enough, I'll have all of your first midterms ready, and the scores I can post in Moodle. Now, the last semester that I did this, as long as I set it up correctly, you should be able to see them when you go into Moodle. So if I type in a grade for you, you should be able to go look at it, although I'm not exactly sure how you would find it. Once I've typed them in, they should be available to you, and that way you can see them. Yes, Fernando.
If I'm not mistaken, in Moodle, you scroll down where you go to navigation for courses on that section, right? Then you would click on your class. I guess for this class, and then it brings up like grades, badges, and all that stuff. So probably you could access grades that way.
Oh, okay. So you know what I'm going to do? As soon as I start typing them in, I'm going to ask people to look and see if they can see it. Because I've done this in the past, but I'm a very low-tech person, as you know. And so I just want to make sure I've done it correctly. I don't think it'll get goofed up, but you never know with technology. So all I have to do is create a column in my grade book for the midterm, and then I can start typing them, and theoretically, then you can see them. So we may have to ask your advice again next class to see how to find them, but theoretically, it should work. And then if you want to know, like, for example, why did you get this score? We can go over questions in class, and I can send you copies of the answers so you can double check and see what happened. But from what I've seen so far, they're looking pretty good. It's just that they're not, I tend to do them not all at once, but like I'll do the first question for everyone, and then I'll do the second question for everyone. So that way they're not done until they're all done, which is kind of slows it down a little, but it's usually quicker and easier for me that way. So soon enough, probably by Wednesday, I'm thinking that they should be ready. If not, maybe Thursday. And then, because I hate to keep you in suspense, but it's so time consuming. So I'll try to get that going. But in the meantime, so we'll finish 9, like I said, and then presumably we'll have that done today. And then we'll be able to do the chapter 9 problem set on Friday rather. And then after that, we can start thinking about the second sample midterm and the actual midterm itself. Great. Once we get past this section, once we get into 10, now 10 is sort of a dividing line in the class. 10 is a discussion about financial markets. Okay, so we're kind of moving the focus away towards finance and money in particular, and the Federal Reserve System and its role in the economy. So to me, this is the most interesting part of the course, but that's just my opinion. Financial markets, where we see how interest rates affect the prices of securities, Then we can study money itself and see what it actually is and how it's created and what effect it has on the economy. And then we can study the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve System, and see how it conducts monetary policy, which determines interest rates, which in turn determine the level of securities prices in the marketplace. So 10, 11, and 12 are all one major topic, which revolves, like I said, around interest rates, monetary policy, and financial markets. Extremely interesting material. I've never met anybody who doesn't find the topic interesting. So that will be the end of the course, and the entire final exam will be based on chapters 10, 11, and 12 only. All right, but anyway, in the meantime, it's too soon to be thinking about such things. Let's jump back into chapter 9. And I do have a couple of video. Oh, I've already had it here. I do have a couple of videos for you to look at. And so we were talking about economic growth, which essentially means how much does real GDP change over time? All right, that's the metric that we'll be using. How much is real GDP changing over time? Now, of course, the reason why we use real instead of nominal is because real refers to the actual output of goods and services. Nominal includes price increases. And so it is very deceiving to look at the growth of nominal GDP. The one that really matters is real GDP. Now, as far as the growth rate is concerned, basically all you're doing is calculating a percentage change. How much did real GDP go up this year compared to last year? That's what we want to know. So in general, what you're doing is you're taking the current real GDP, you subtract last year's, and then you divide by last year's to convert it into a percentage. And as we've already discussed, the ideal rate of real GDP growth is somewhere between 2 to 4% per year. And because that in that range, real GDP is growing fast enough to keep unemployment from going up, but it also is not growing so fast that it will trigger higher inflation. So that's what the Fed is aiming for. Now, we don't always achieve it, but I think we looked last time at Fred and we discovered that over the last several decades, real GDP growth has averaged about 2.9% per year. So that's pretty much what we're hoping for. And in spite of the fact that it's only 2.9%, that means that we're basically doubling our standards of living about every 25 years, or roughly once every generation. So basically the economy then is roughly 4 times as big as it was during your grandparents' lifetime. That's pretty staggering to think about. 4 times what it was, or even double what it was when your parents were your age. Every 25 years, roughly it doubles. Okay, when we grow at that kind of a rate. So it sounds like a small number, but it really makes a huge difference in the standards of living that we enjoy. Anyway, so here's a quick example. If the real GDP went from 10 to $10.8 trillion over 1 year, that translates into a very rapid growth rate of 8%. Now, this does occasionally happen. There have been periods in US history where real GDP growth was in that neighborhood, but it didn't last for very long. It's very hard to sustain such high rates of growth. Usually after this, it starts to settle down to more normal levels, like 3 or 4. But you do occasionally go through these periods where the economy is just absolutely cranking, and it can grow this fast for short periods of time. So it's kind of like, imagine yourself for a couple of weeks, you're falling behind in your work. You suddenly decide to spend every waking moment studying for your exams, and you study, and you do well in your exams. Does that continue when the exams are over? No, you probably slow it back down to a more normal level. And something like that can happen here. The economy grows very fast, and then at some point it reaches a limit and it starts to slow down again. But in general, we're hoping for that 2 to 4% range. Then, of course, a lot of economists feel that GDP growth is fine as far as it goes, but to really understand how this is affecting individuals, we should probably also look at per capita real GDP growth, which means not the total, but per person. Okay, so in other words, if each individual is finding their income growing, that means that the society as a whole is better off. Okay, now sometimes what happens is that the population grows faster than the economy. So we may experience real GDP growth, and yet we're kind of falling behind because the increase in output is not helping everybody. So here, for example, we took the same numbers from before. Real GDP of 10 trillion went up to 10.8 trillion, but this time we're also taking into account the population. Now, the population went from 300 million during this period to 305 million. That increase is about, that's about a 1.7% increase. So the population grew at about 1.7%, but real GDP went up by about 8%. So in spite of the increase in population, real per capita GDP actually did go up, although not by 8%. It actually went up by roughly 6.2%. In other words, of the 8% of real GDP, 1.7% is population growth. The rest is real per capita growth. Okay, so the economy is growing, but on a per capita basis, it's only going up 6.23%, which is still very good. And in fact, I remember last time we looked at a chart showing you the levels of real GDP for different countries throughout the world, where the United States is by far number one. But when we look at it on a per capita basis, we sink to something like 13, because there's a lot of very small countries. Oh, that's okay. Very small countries with very high incomes where the per capita is quite high. Several oil countries, for example, plus you might recall Luxembourg was on top of that list because they earn a lot of money from banking, but it's a very, very small country. So the per capita GDP is very, very high. In fact, Luxembourg might, let's see, this might be fun. Does Luxembourg have a larger population than White Plains, New York? What do you think? I don't know, that might be a stretch. Oh no, they think I mean size. Okay, so White Plains is 58,000 people. Let's see what Luxembourg has. Oh no, it's not even close. All right, my mistake. No, it's 632,000. That's probably more like Westchester. Oh, okay. So it's about 2/3 as many people as Westchester County, but they bring in an awful lot of money from banking. And so their population, their per capita GDP is the highest in the world as a result of that. Okay, so we get a sense of perspective now. Roughly 2/3 of the size of Westchester County. All right, it's a small country. All right, so now, of course, we have already seen that the business cycle refers to fluctuations in real GDP. It goes up and it goes down over time, and but on average, it's growing fairly steadily. Now, of course, we've also been introduced to this concept, potential real GDP. This is pretty much the best we can do with the resources that we have. In other words, to reach this level, we have to be in a position where we're not wasting any resources, which typically is interpreted to mean there's no cyclical unemployment. Because when you think about it, when there is cyclical unemployment, there's a lot of unemployed people who could be doing something very useful. So that would be considered wasteful. All right, all of a sudden PowerPoint is not responding to my mouse. I don't know why. I just rebooted this computer this morning. I'm getting annoyed. Well, technology is designed to aggravate us. It's helpful, but it's the double-edged sword. That's to say the least. All right, let me turn this thing off. Okay, no reason. It just doesn't feel like working. It's going to be like that all day, I'm guessing. No, it just doesn't feel like working. Unbelievable. I'm tired. I don't want to work anymore. All right. So potential. Now, we did introduce this aggregate production function. Now, this is meant to be a follow-up to what we did in the previous chapter. You might recall that you had the total product curve for single firm, which we assumed only labor was variable, and it had a shape just like this. Okay, and so remember, at first the output increases at a rapidly rising rate, then it starts to slow down a bit, it reaches a maximum level, and then it starts to fall off. Well, for the entire economy, we have a comparable notion, which is called an aggregate production function, where the word aggregate is simply a fancy word for total. And so instead of having one product, this one, for example, remember it was the total product of soda, or actually it was the total product of labor, though, in the production of soda. Here we're looking at everything in the economy. Okay, so the entire economy is on this vertical axis. And here's the quantity of labor, just like in this diagram. The only, again, thing that's different is this is referring to a single bottling plant that makes soda. This is the entire economy. So whenever in economics you see the word aggregate, it means for the entire economy. It means total, but it refers to the entire economy. And so, for example, if we needed a price in here somewhere, it wouldn't be the price of a single good, it would be the price level for the entire economy, such as the CPI. All right, so here you can see on this curve, there's a point where we've reached full employment, no cyclical unemployment. And at that point, we reach the potential real GDP. And, sometimes we can briefly go beyond full employment. If, let's say, everybody's working overtime, it can, for short periods of time, be possible to reach a slightly higher level. But even when it does, it tends to fall back fairly quickly to this potential real GDP. When we're down here somewhere, we have unemployment. And unfortunately, when we're down in this neighborhood, unless, it's possible to stay here for extended periods of time. Let's put it that way. So this gap here represents unemployment. Sometimes it's called the unemployment gap. This piece here, sometimes it's called the inflationary gap. Because this type of situation may trigger higher inflation. This means we're growing faster than that 2 to 4% range. So we're overdoing it a little bit. We're consuming resources at a very rapid level, and we're getting more output, but this can only last for so long until the economy grows, or until we have better resources or more resources. This is pretty much what we're stuck with. This whole curve, think of it as being fixed at a given point in time. So you can think of it as having fixed resources. Like this is today's curve. Next year's curve might be different. In fact, you can probably imagine, based on what we saw with the total product curve, that this aggregate production curve, or aggregate production function, let's say this is 2021, it might go up to here in 2022 as resources increase. For example, if more people join the labor force, if technology accelerates, that type of thing. So over time, this aggregate production function can go up, which implies that we can produce more goods and services with the same resources. And this is exactly what we hope to see. Otherwise, if this curve never moved, GDP could never change. It would always be stuck at the same point. So in other words, it's because technology improves, more resources become available, for example, if a lot of businesses invest in more advanced computer equipment, let's say, or they hire more workers, whatever the case may be, that would cause the curve to shift up. All right. And that's what we want to see. We want it to grow fast. We want it to go up and up and up. We want more and more output with the same resources. And that's how our standards of living keep growing. All right. So, you know, I mean, when you think about the goodies that we have, I mean, you know, your iPhones and your laptops and the internet and all the rest, none of that stuff existed 40 years ago or 50 years ago. What did people do? Well, production was much less efficient. If you wanted to pay a bill, you had to put a check in the mail and hopefully it got there within a week. Now you just get online and boom, it's already taken care of. You know, it's just amazing how much things have changed in the last 40, 50 years. And that will only continue to accelerate in the future. And that should drive this curve further and further up. All right, anyway, so full employment means that there's no cyclical unemployment. And then we have the labor market. We already went through this. We just basically created a supply and demand framework to explain the relationship between the supply and demand of labor and how equilibrium wages are determined. And so labor is just like any other commodity in the economy. There's a supply of it and there's a demand for it. Where they cross or intersect, that's where we find the equilibrium price of labor. And the price of labor is nothing but wages. Okay, so right there, we think of the price of labor as being the wages that we have to hire or pay people for them to work. Okay, now the demand for labor is assumed to be based not on nominal wages, but real wages. All right, the higher the real wage, the more people are willing to work. It's just that simple. There's your demand curve. And of course, from the employer's perspective, the cheaper labor is, the more labor they're going to hire. Of course they are. So imagine the scenario, like imagine McDonald's. You know, we discussed this already many times. They have those new screens in there where you can order your food and not have to interact with a person. There are people still up there. They'll never get rid of the people altogether. You can't have a business without people, but you can minimize the number of jobs they have to do. And in fact, the trend is always towards automating the tasks that require the least amount of skills, which is what you would expect. Okay, why should you have a person just do nothing but take orders? What if you could use them to do something more valuable? Like maybe they can be trained to cook, which a machine can't cook. A machine can take your order, but a machine really can't cook. So you might be better off retraining some of your employees to cook and let the machines take the orders to the extent possible. And in the process, the average salary will go up because more people have better skills as a result of this. Now, what is it though that triggers McDonald's buying these probably very expensive screens in their stores? They can't be cheap, but the store considers it to be worthwhile because it's a long-term investment. Those machines will last a long time. They don't get tired. They don't get hungry. They don't go on strike. They don't have to be paid. Okay. They don't need breaks. So in the short run, it might be a very, very expensive investment, but in the long run, they'll likely save a lot of money on wages, especially as the, different governments keep agitating for higher and higher minimum wages. This trend will only accelerate itself. So everybody will have an incentive to use as much technology to reduce or eliminate low-paying jobs. The ones that do not require a whole lot of skills, those will slowly disappear. But at the same time, though, the more advanced jobs will improve because people have to build those computer screens. People have to design them, so all of a sudden, those types of jobs will increase, and we'll see the jobs of people who just take orders will disappear. Now, in the sense of economic growth, that will certainly speed things up. The only drawback is that people who don't have any more advanced skills are going to find it much harder to find jobs. So gradually, people with low skill sets will find themselves let's just say it'll be harder and harder for them to be employed. So the burden is on them to pull them out of somehow. So in a lot of states, and the federal government too, they do have training money available for people whose jobs are eliminated by technology and trade. So that's an important component of all this. And now last time, I think I mentioned too, that this process we're describing was introduced and discussed in very great detail by a very famous economist. He called this whole process creative destruction, because advanced technology is destroying existing technologies, or at least making them obsolete. And so this is how society advances. Okay, so in other words, outdated industries and technologies are replaced by more advanced and more productive industries and technologies, which raises standards of living, but can also make it difficult for low-skilled people to find work. So in other words, those people have to, they're always the ones who are going to have a problem. And no matter what time frame we're looking at, there's always going to be those unfortunate people at the margin who their skill set is quite low to start with, and they find that their jobs are being essentially replaced by technology. And so the job of society is to keep them, provide them with more training to make sure that they don't become unemployed for the rest of their lives, for example. So that's part of it, but still, on balance, creative destruction gives us a very rapid growing standard of living, and it makes it, technology advances because let's face it, whoever invents the best technology also makes the most profits. So you've got a lot of very talented people out there working day and night to create new technologies to make themselves rich, but to also make us better off. So this is how creative destruction works. Schumpeter was writing about this in the 40s, I believe. Let's just take a quick look at him. He wrote this very famous book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. He's best known for creating the phrase creative destruction, which describes the process that sees new innovations replacing existing ones that are rendered obsolete over time. Let's see, when did he write that? Oh, it doesn't say, but his book, right, like he mentioned specifically the Ford Model T in 1908, which gradually replaced the horse and buggy, which put a lot of people in the horse and buggy industry out of business, but it also made everybody else better off. Let's see. You can read more about this at, of course, Investopedia has something about this. Yeah, I figured as much in the 1940s. So Schumpeter, I don't know if he ever won the Nobel Prize or not, but he certainly was a very, very famous economist. Very famous. Let's see. I'm going to check this out. He did, 1993. Well, there you go. He did eventually win it. Excellent. All right. So anyway, that's what this is all about. Now, supply of labor, that's coming from you and me. And naturally enough, the more we get paid, the more we're going to want to work. Of course it is. Now, for example, let's say people who are, discouraged workers. Let's think about them. People who gave up a long time ago and looking for another job. What if all of a sudden wages are really getting to very high levels? They might be tempted to jump back into the labor force and start working again if the wages are high enough. Okay, if not, they might just continue to do whatever they're doing. But yeah, as wages rise, of course, people will want to work more, because remember, when you work, you're incurring an opportunity cost in terms of what else you could have been doing. And so if wages start to go up, it may reach a point where the new higher wages is more than enough to offset any opportunity costs you might suffer. And so it might starts to make sense for you to start working more hours. Or if you have the opportunity to work overtime, some companies do offer overtime, and which means you get paid more, typically 50% more per hour when you're working overtime, as an incentive to get you to, come into the company on Saturdays and keep working. And that's done because it gives you a very powerful incentive to work more hours. Some kind of businesses that are very seasonal will end up having to pay their employees a lot of extra money to work crazy hours during the peak of their season. So the bottom line is the labor supply curve will have to be upward sloping. The more we get paid, the more we want to work. So we bring them together, and there you go. There's our equilibrium real wage and our equilibrium quantity of labor, just like any other supply and demand curves you've ever seen before. Now, the potential, by which we mean, like up here when I showed you the curve rising over time, let's go back to that. What's causing this to happen? Why is the curve going up? Well, again, Schumpeter would say it's creative destruction. New technologies replacing the old ones. And here we're seeing that output can grow just because there's more labor available, but especially this one, productivity of labor. Okay. So here's a perfect example. Now, you go into the supermarket in this day and age, and what happens is you put your products on the belt there, and it rolls past the scanner, and the computer magically figures out how much you owe the store for your groceries. But let's say in the 70s, it didn't work that way. The person behind the counter there had to literally type the price of every good into a cash register, they were called. A cash register. You may have seen these ancient devices on TV. Let me show you. Yes, and they could be sophisticated or they could be, small and, but basically the bottom line is somebody's got to stand there and punch in these numbers for all these goodies that you're buying. And that meant they had to do this very accurately. Each item has a code, but you still have to know the price. It's typically, it used to have little stickers and they would tell you the price. And then if there's no sticker, somebody had to run in the back and figure it out. Let's just say that it wasn't very efficient. Now, all of a sudden, so in other words, the same cashier in 1970, and this, let's say 50 years later here, the new current cashiers can probably handle twice as many customers per hour just because the machines are so much better. Not that they're necessarily better workers, but because they have access to this amazing technology. And so productivity is going up and up and up. And naturally enough, the wages are going to reflect that. People who are doing this now will get paid better in real terms than they would have in the 70s because their productivity is higher, which means the store's profits are higher. And therefore they can afford to pay. Oh, really? You actually had to do that? Oh, so you can tell us how dreadfully inefficient that is. I didn't know that they still had that. I thought everybody had scanners by now, and you had to know all the prices, didn't you? And you had to remember them, and you had to type them in, and you had to make sure there were no typos, and it was a nightmare, I bet. Oh my God. So I guess the technology hasn't completely been erased.
Yeah, and for avoiding the transactions, you had to call the manager to like the old paper. They would do that. I don't know why they keep using this system.
I don't. They're chiselers. They're so cheap. I mean, how stupid can you be? I mean, can you imagine how inefficient that must have been? Oh my God. Well, I did not know that. I thought that everybody had gotten the scanners, but I guess not. But imagine a supermarket where there's always a long line of people buying hundreds of items. Imagine what a nightmare that would be. It's unbelievable. It's unimaginable. But so this is how technology can make our lives so much easier because our productivity is going up. So, or like imagine accounting. You know that everything in accounting is done not even just with Excel, but with sophisticated software that's designed. So you basically type in a few numbers and it does all the rest for you. 40, 50 years ago, everything had to be done by hand and on paper. And so can you imagine what a nightmare that must have been? So accounting is so much more efficient now because of all this wonderful technology. And naturally, now an accountant now could handle a lot more clients than he could have in the past. And so it's because of the technology, but what it ultimately does is it increases our productivity. Anyway, so labor supply can grow because people work more hours. There can be more people available for work, and the population itself can grow. So the nice thing about all of this is that, well, unfortunately, according to this, if labor supply grows without any change in productivity, real wages can actually drop. Now, we know that nominal wages don't normally drop, but real wages can if they grow more slowly than the rate of inflation. Okay, so in other words, if the nominal wage goes up 5%, but inflation is 10%, then your real wage actually went down by 5%. And so this can actually happen. Nominal wages tend not to go down, but real wages can. On the other hand, and so by the way, with more labor, we're moving up the same curve. Okay, we're on the same curve because technology has not improved yet. So we're simply getting more output with this new quantity of labor. But once productivity starts to go up, the entire curve, as I showed you before, goes up. So even if we're still at the same level of using the same amount of labor, we can still produce more output because technology is improved and productivity is going up. And that's where we start to get some serious increases in the standards of living. And then on top of that, we can find ourselves moving up the curve. Oh, wait, sorry, here's labor demand. Now, labor demand goes up when productivity goes up because you're producing more for the employer. You're worth more to the employer because you can produce more. And so what happens then is that the technology can have a double benefit. Not only can we produce more with the same amount of labor, but we actually now hire even more labor. And so the output goes from A to B to C because of the technology. So that means that standards of living are really zooming along now. And on the higher curve, typically wages are higher as well. All right, so anyway, productivity can go up because of several reasons, savings and investment. So like in order to acquire those scanners at the supermarkets, they had to most likely borrow a lot of money by issuing stocks or bonds. And so people use their savings to buy stocks and bonds to lend money to a business who then turns around and invests it in what we will call physical capital. So scanners in a supermarket are referred to as physical capital. And so if the store keeps investing in this very advanced technology, that will increase labor productivity and wages and standards of living. But we have to have saving and investment to make this possible. So if nobody saves any of their money, there's no investment and the economy doesn't grow. So savings and investment is an important component of this. And then human capital refers to our education and our training and our experience. In other words, when you start working, let's say you're studying accounting and you get a job. Well, on day one, your productivity is relatively low because you just started. You're still learning what's going on. As you continue to work on that job, you'll become better and more efficient. And so we say that you are acquiring human capital. In other words, your knowledge and your skills are growing because you are working at this job. And so as people continue to work and develop their skills, that means human capital is going up. And that by itself, even with no change in technology, will increase output because people are simply more efficient. And human capital also includes education. If more people have a degree, then society will be more efficient because people with degrees can be trained to do a lot of things. People without degrees are in a bit of trouble. So as a society increases its education levels, that also increases labor productivity. So you see how all this stuff feeds on itself. More human capital means people work more hours, they earn more money, they save, they invest. Corporations invest their savings in better physical capital. So it's sort of like a virtuous cycle, it's sometimes called. And this is how the economy starts to grow and standards of living increase. Yeah, so because again, but savings, without savings, we cannot have investment. If a corporation wants to issue stocks, people have to have money to buy the stocks. So savings is a very important part of this. Now, in the short run, more capital is important, but it does eventually run into the law of diminishing returns. So we need more than just more capital. Human capital is also an important part of this as well. Okay, in other words, people become more efficient, better trained, their knowledge base grows, then that will help ensure rapidly growing real GDP. Human capital, as I've started to say, means more education and training, more job experience. Now here, lifestyle choices means, do you choose to work more hours? Which, you know, I mean, some people do, not everybody, but more people are willing to work, then that also increases output. And so got all this human capital constantly increasing as people get more training and experience, and that contributes very much to growth over the long run. And of course, technology. I mean, how every day we're exposed to technology. We see evidence of it everywhere. In fact, I just recently bought a new car, and my old car was 11 years old, and it wasn't really an old car. It was still in good shape, but I get into this new car, and it's got this computer on the dashboard, and all I have to do is say out loud, play this song or this other song, and it plays it. How is this possible? Well, because my iPhone is plugged into the dashboard, but still, it's set up so that I can literally say to my dashboard computer, please play the following song. And it says, okay, no problem, and here it is. Or I can say, please tell me where, Smith Street is or something. And it'll say, no problem, here's how you get there. And I can actually make phone calls through it without my hands ever leaving the steering wheel. Well, that wasn't in my 11-year-old car, let me tell you. What happened during those intervening 11 years? The cars got a lot more sophisticated in just those 11 years. And I'm still learning all the different things that it can do. It's just unbelievable. I'm still learning how to find all these new features because it's just unbelievable what it's capable of doing. And it has something where if you stop at a red light, it actually turns the engine off for a minute to save you gas, and then it comes right back on again. It's just unbelievable what it's capable of doing. So naturally, I'm happier with this car. And not only that, but the price didn't really even go up realistically all that much since I bought the previous one. So this is the benefit of advancing technology. So output is growing and they're making us better off. All right, now before we get to these, there's some theories of growth here that I want to look at, but before we do that, I do have a couple of videos that I wanted you to see that involve productivity and growth. They're going to actually address the question of what actually drives productivity and economic growth. Okay, so why don't we start with this first one, productivity and growth. So let's see, let me send you that link and put that in the chat room. And let's begin. Okay, let's watch this for a bit and see how we like this. Hmm.
Um, Is the video supposed to be playing?
In progress.
All right, I thought that was especially well done. Made a lot of important points. I can't find it right now, but I found a graph at one time which shows how standards of living throughout the world changed throughout history. And it pretty much didn't change until roughly the Industrial Revolution, after which it started going a lot faster. But they made a very good point here. Computers by themselves are helpful, but it was really the idea that we could connect them to each other through the internet that suddenly made everything take off, so that now all of a sudden, like they said, you can have anything you want. You can order something from Amazon and you don't even know where it's coming from. It could literally be coming from some other part of the world, and yet there it shows up in your mailbox in a couple of days and nothing, no problems, it's there. And so that's one of the reasons why technology is advancing so quickly, because the ability of the computers to connect to each other, and all this information is readily available to everyone. And like I was saying before, if you wanted to pay a bill at this point in time, well, you just get onto your bank's online account and take care of it. No more checks, no more letters. That's ancient history. So what this means then is that technology should continue to accelerate, and that can only mean that our standards of living will just keep growing like crazy in the foreseeable future, which is nice to know. Anyway, so let's see. I think there's one more here that we want to look at. It's also another one. They're basically addressing the issue: what is it that generates growth? So let's get that going. Oh, hold on one second. Yeah, and you saw Zimbabwe in there. We know from our discussion about inflation, Zimbabwe experienced a very high rate of inflation in the late 2000s because the government just kept printing up money. And so, yes, a country can have a lot of wealth and yet still be very poor because the government is so awful. That happens too. So, all right, anyway, let me just post this one. And let's check it out.
Professor,
Yes.
it's not playing on our screens.
It's not. What the hell? Are you? All right, let's stop it right here. Is something going on here? Did I post it to the right place? Oh, this is so annoying. Hold on one second. Did I not put it in the chat room?
I got the videos in the chat.
Yeah, Professor, I got it on the chat as well. I mean, I thought you said that we are supposed to watch it on our own.
You
That's
are.
why.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you watch it on mine, you may not be able to hear it. So it's easier if I just post it like this. So somebody's saying that they can't watch it though. So I posted it again. I don't know what's going on here. If you can't see it, can you at least see the link? Okay, so all right, let's keep going. But if anybody, here's the thing I just want to point out: if you can't watch one of these for some oddball reason, all the links are right here in Moodle. So everyone that we've watched is in this list. So if something is stopping you from watching it, you can always watch it when we're done. Okay. So is anyone still having an issue? All right. So if, because once in a while, a couple of times I sent the link to the wrong place and then nobody could see it. But as long as some of you can see it, you should all theoretically be able to see it. So I'll tell you what, let's carry on from there. But if anybody still can't see it, just check these out when we're done. They're right here. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it. Okay, so that was interesting. It brought up some points that weren't made by the other video, and specifically, they're talking about institutional details like the government. Do we have strong property rights or not? Or do we have a corrupt government that owns everything? Like in China in the late 50s, they just arbitrarily decided that everybody should work on the farms and nobody would own anything. And of course, output was so terribly low that a lot of people starved to death because nobody had an incentive to work. And it was just that simple. So, and of course, in some countries, there's always a lot of chaos going on. There's always revolutions and all kinds of stuff going on. None of that helps. So to have a stable, strong legal system that respects property rights, that's a huge part of economic growth. Without that, you really aren't going to get anywhere. So anyway, so now we're going to look quickly at the end of chapter 9. Now remember, our goal is to finish this today so that we can do the problem set on Thursday or Friday. So there's just a couple here that we want to consider today, although there's certainly plenty more. Classical growth theory, which we've discussed a little bit in the past, this basically came out of the, this is what followed after Adam Smith, basically. And really it lasted well into the 1900s. And then after that, we started seeing these other theories arising. Classical theory, now, by the way, here, this is a little bit different. We're not, this is a sort of, this is not really based on Adam Smith. This is based on a writer named Thomas Malthus. Now, Malthus, I think he was a minister. He lived in the 18th century. And he wrote a lot of very pessimistic books about the future of the world. And basically what he was claiming, now keep in mind, Malthus is living at a time when productivity growth is very low. Most people work on farms, and the standards of living in his time were essentially the same as they had been for many, many generations. This is a time when productivity growth was very minimal. Farming was done the same way it had always been done, with very little advancements. And he was claiming here that in the future, population growth would always outstrip our ability to grow food. And so there would always be a lot of misery in the world. Devin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I read about him in an environmental book about how he basically thought that, the population would outgrow the food and then it would become scarce, which would lead to anarchy.
Yes, exactly. That's what he said. Now, remember, like I said, though, this is before the Industrial Revolution really got going and where productivity started to grow very quickly. So you can kind of see why he thought this, because in his lifetime, the world had never experienced any real productivity growth in farming. So he was afraid that the population would continue to grow more quickly than the food sources, and therefore there would always be starvation. So his idea was that maybe we should slow down population growth, because otherwise eventually we'll all be starving to death. So it was a very, very pessimistic outlook on the world. And, and a lot of people took it very seriously, but soon after this, that's when really productivity started growing very quickly. So his predictions turned out to be completely false. But at the time, he had a lot of influence on thinking that, why don't we figure out ways to discourage people from having so many children rather than, letting people starve to death. So at some point, though, it became clear when productivity started increasing that he was actually not correct about this. But yeah, so I can see why you would reading about him in environmental economics, because he's essentially saying that humanity will consume all of the world's resources very quickly because the growth of the population will outstrip the world's ability to support them. And so it was a very gloomy, pessimistic outlook. And anyway, he also felt that even if agricultural growth started to advance, the population would grow even faster. And so that no matter what we did, basically we were doomed to starve. Okay, so that was kind of the way he looked at it. So yes, it's true that, he's writing at a time when productivity is growing very slowly. he did also think that even if that started to change, the population will grow faster in response. And that means that no matter how fast farming improved, that starvation would be the natural result. Now, neo-growth theory or new growth theory basically says the opposite. Improving technology, rising productivity lead to progressively higher real GDP per capita. That's the key right there, per capita. Not just the total, but per capita will continue to accelerate. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen. In fact, farming productivity in the United States just exploded in the early 20th century. You know, the percentage of people who used to work in agriculture was quite high, probably more than half. In fact, why don't we see if we can find out something about this? Let's look at the history of the percentage of people who work in agriculture in the US. That's a bit of a stretch. Let's see what we can do here. All right, so, oh, this is not bad, except why does it only go to 1860? Well, you can see already, even in the 19th century, look what's happening here. The percentage of American labor force in agriculture in 1800 was 83%. And by 1860, around the Civil War, it had already dropped to 53%. So obviously something was changing even in the 19th century to increase productivity. I kind of wish they had gone a little further. Wow, that's very odd how they would just stop in 1860 like that. I'm looking for a chart. Oh, here, okay, well, that's the total. Oh, here it is, here it is. All right, so in 1840, 69%, it goes down 1860, 58, and 1880, 49. So by 1900, we're down to 38%. But it doesn't go any further. What's wrong with these people? All right, well, if we can find the 20th century, that would be nice. Oh, that's an article. Anyway, but you get the picture. So I didn't realize that it had started quite that soon. I mean, throughout the entire 19th century already, farming productivity was growing pretty quickly. Without a lot of advanced machinery, although the railroads certainly were a big help, because the railroads made it possible for the farmers to ship their crops very long distances, whereas previously it really could only be sold in local markets. So that was quite a big change. Let's see. They now make up 1.3% of the labor force. Okay, so in other words, we went from 83% at the start of the 1800s to about 1.3% now. And yet, do we have enough food? Of course we do. We have so much food that we export a lot of it to foreign countries. And that's coming from 1.3% of the labor force. How is this happening? Well, in farming, a lot of it is coming from advanced technology, machinery. In fact, if you go to visit a typical farm, you're not going to see people, a lot of workers doing everything by hand. Yeah, look at this. How much more wheat can this thing handle than human beings, do you think? Look at this thing. Oh my God, some of these machines are just unbelievable. Modern agricultural machine tractor in action. Look at that. It's just sucking up all that grain. How many people do you think it would take to do that same job? This is why productivity is so high. Look at this. All these amazing machines they have. Look at this. How much wheat do you think this thing can process in an hour? As opposed to people standing there cutting it down by hand. That's pretty amazing. And this is what productivity growth is all about. The technology, this is physical capital that's accelerating. Man, that's going to cut a lot of wheat in a hurry. All right, well, anyway, so this is what neo-growth theory is all about. And then this is, oh yeah, here we go. This is where we finally got to discuss Joseph Schumpeter. I jumped the gun a little bit with him, but I did have it mentioned it down here. And so outdated and inefficient firms disappear while newer, more efficient firms take their place. And we know already this is creative destruction. And of course, the end effect is that we have higher standards of living, consumer choice. Although again, some people's jobs disappear, they're typically very low paying jobs. So we don't miss them. It's just that we have to find help for these people to get trained for new jobs. And of course, as I said in the video, economic freedom and property rights are hugely important for stimulating growth and prosperity. Without that, nobody has an incentive to do anything. So how can policymakers help in this area? Well, they can increase the amount of capital available to workers. They can provide tax breaks, for example, to corporations that acquire physical capital. They can make it easier for us to get an education. And now this part, let's face it, the private sector is really responsible for this, but the government does some research in these areas. The military in particular actually does research in a lot of advanced technologies. In fact, you may not realize this, but the military invented the internet. It was the private sector that turned it to commercial uses, but the military actually invented it in, I believe, the 40s. It was meant to be a way for the different commanders to communicate with their troops, but somebody realized that it could be used for commercial uses as well. And well, now we know how important that is. And so we can have more incentives to innovate, save, work, acquire new skills, encourage research and development, a lot of this through tax breaks, improve education, and then of course, encouraging trade and specialization. These are all ways that the government can encourage growth in the country. So anyway, so that's pretty much all we have to say about growth. And so like I said, chapter 10 is about financial markets, and chapter 11 and 12 are about money and monetary policy. So those last three chapters will be the contents of the final exam. In the meantime, now that we're done with chapter 9, what I'd like you to do is do the problem set for Friday. And then the following week, we'll work on the sample midterm number 2. And then you can do the actual second midterm, which is all about chapters 5 through 9. And then we can dive into our last section, which is, in my opinion, the most exciting one, because we get to talk about money and financial markets like stock markets. So anyway, I guess that's all we need to do today. Yes, Fernando?
So once we've covered like all of the the curriculum and the midterms,
Yep.
we move on to a new
Yes,
Yeah.
chapter 10 is the new section. 10, 11, and 12 cover financial markets, money, and monetary policy.
But then I'm asking, after that, when we cover that's it for the class, or
That's it. Yeah, by that time, it'll be the beginning of December. Yeah, those are 3 very long chapters, but they're very, very, very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, that would be the end of the course. Now, if you can't get enough of this stuff, you can sign up for intermediate macro, because they do have that. And you'll get to go more, further into all these wonderful ideas and take it to the next level. But for us, it has to stop there. Sadly enough, I mean, we can only do so much. And then you'll be ready to go into either maybe micro if you haven't already taken it, or you could do intermediate macro and take this to another level. So anyway, I know it's sad to think about the class ever being over, but that's where we're headed. Okay. So, all right, I guess if there's no last minute questions, I'll see you all on Friday, and hopefully the weather will turn around a little. It's looking pretty grim out there. Okay, so,
Thanks,
I
Professor.
see some chats. You're welcome. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
All right, see you later.